Hi, everyone. I am Sam Osterhout. I'm the executive producer here at Lincoln Square, and I am so happy to welcome Antonio Delgado to the show. He is the Lieutenant Governor of New York. He was elected in 2022, and he has announced a run for governor next year, challenging the Democratic incumbent Kathy Hochul. Lieutenant Governor Delgado, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you, and I'm I want to get to a couple of bigger ticket items. National Dems. I want to talk about some Trump stuff, of course. But first, I just want to hear what made you decide to run for governor.
Status quo being broken. There's a lot of challenges right now when it comes to people's belief in our democracy. They don't think that it works for them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lurch, I think, that you can tell that's happening nationally when it comes to people's desire to elevate the work of democracy and believe in government that is for the people and by the people. The truth of the matter is it no longer is. And it's not just in national terrain, but in state government. Right here in New York, we have the largest wealth inequality gap in the country. And as economic inequality grows, both across the country and certainly in New York, people get left behind. They get unaccounted for. They can't afford housing. They can't afford childcare. They can't afford health care. And they start asking themselves, how is democracy working for me? How is it in a great blue state like New York, with the third largest economy in the world, 1 in 5 of our kids live in poverty and half those kids live in deep poverty? How is it that 2 out of 5 households in New York, the great blue state of New York, can't afford basic necessities? 1 out of 4 New Yorkers can't afford their energy bills, their housing costs, their rent. That is a travesty. And when you have folks who are struggling every single day to find economic opportunity, you have to ask yourself, what is it going to take? We need bold, decisive, transformational change. We need vision-oriented leadership. And that's fundamentally what I hope to bring to the table here in New York.
Yeah, I've heard you say that wealth income stat before, and it's mind-blowing. New York has the biggest wealth income gap in the nation.
Yes, we also have among the most, if not the most, amount of billionaires, millionaires here in New York. And the reality is the money continues to funnel up. The concentration of wealth, the concentration of corporate power, entrenched economic and political power is pervasive all throughout New York, despite being a state that is viewed as a progressive state, as a blue state. And I think it speaks to the way in which the Democratic Party writ large has drifted away from everyday working people and has more or less married its success to corporate power, and ultimately has created more economic inequality every step of the way. And that, to me, is an indictment. It also explains why 1 in 5 of our kids are in poverty. And it also explains why we see a situation where we saw the biggest swing from left to right in the country here in New York. Low income, middle income, Black and brown folks who feel left behind, unaccounted for, either decided the alternative was better or decided it didn't really matter. And it's not just, our Black and brown communities, all of our young people who are coming of age right now, living at a time where the average age of a first-time home buyer is 40. But go back 20 some odd years ago, it was 28, right? Rents are exceedingly high. People are being priced out of the American dream. And as long as that continues to happen, then folks are going to check themselves out of democracy.
Right. I mean, I've read that New York is also last in the country in home ownership. Is that right?
Yeah, we're not doing well at all in that home ownership, but also a lot of it boils down to a renter's economy, right?
Sure.
This is where we've drifted, both in terms of a renter's economy, a credit-centric economy. A lot of our young people are growing up, they don't own anything anymore. They just owe. And think about that. When I was growing up, I thought I was going to be better off than my parents. It was believed that I had a better than 50-50 chance. And the data, by the way, backed that up. The data backed it up. Now you find most kids growing up, and they're going to do worse off. So if you're functioning with the belief that democracy is working for everybody, and yet our kids coming up from behind are going to do worse off, you have to begin to question the very idea of democracy altogether. And what is it going to take to really account for it? And the reality is we have to be willing to attack economic inequality. We are reaching levels of economic inequality that certainly I can't recall in my lifetime. You know, it's maddening to think that 2/3 of this country is literally living paycheck to paycheck, and that the top 1% own more wealth than the bottom, with the entire middle class.
Yeah,
basically at this point, which is a first in its history. And so all these realities, and I'm speaking nationally, but in New York, these same dimensions are ongoing. The economic inequality, the pricing of homes, the pricing of healthcare, the insurance, all of it continues to skyrocket. The cost of energy, all of it just keeps going up, 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 and people are being left behind.
And what do you see as roadblocks? I mean, what, you know, I was having a conversation the other day with someone who was on the New York State of Health Exchange, and me and my family had been on the exchange for a long time, and we, you know, it was a love-hate with it, right? We were able to get affordable healthcare, which was kind of amazing, but it was a bureaucratic, like crazy nightmare every year trying to re-enroll, and you know, and I know you have a plan for healthcare. What are the roadblocks to doing better? It seems like New York, anything is possible, but is that true?
Well, first of all, we stopped being aspirational with our healthcare. We're just tinkering around the edges. We've basically decided that the current monopoly system that the insurance companies more or less have on our healthcare system is what it is, and we'll just work around that, right? We'll just sort of take a fundamentally broken system, and rather than tear it down and rebuild a new one, we'll just keep duct taping it until we think it's sufficient. And that's why the premiums keep going up. Deductibles keep going up. That's why denials to insurance claims keep going up. That's why the appeal process only gets more complicated. That's why you see hospitals able to merge and lose care for folks in those areas, because what's driving this entire enterprise is profit. And we have not made a concerted effort here in New York, and certainly across the country, to remove the profit motive out of our healthcare system. And New York has the resources and the capacity financially to be a leading force when it comes to this. There's the Build New York Health Act, which would create a single payer system that I've supported that would push us beyond the insurance marketplace. People are not paying for healthcare. They're paying for insurance.
Right.
Insurance is designed. The whole business model is to try to figure out how to get you from not claiming it. So that is the world we live in right now, where we have people who are paying for insurance for a basic human right, matter of life and death. And so how is it we can't get beyond? Well, it's a simple answer. The insurance companies, the hospitals, the entrenched power that's able to leverage its wherewithal financially to discourage political actors from making the critical steps needed. And also because they have the resources to misinform the public about the nature of the change, the magnitude of the change, and the impact it's going to have on them.
Somebody in the chat said Oregon has universal health care, and Oregon is a war-torn hellscape. All right. So we don't want that. Of course, I'm kidding.
We're at the point, you know, I think back to 2009, you know, we passed the ACA, and the big issue there was, you know, pre-existing conditions.
Right.
And think about that. We lived at a time where it was a big fight to convince insurance companies that they had to take individuals on their plans that have pre-existing conditions. And we were convinced for a long while that, of course, they shouldn't do that. That would hurt their bottom line. Why would they want to? But that's the whole point. The fact that that was the last big fight. You know, we didn't even succeed when it came to a public option at that point. Meanwhile, decades later, premiums are going up, deductibles are going up, the insurance bureaucracy only continues to grow, the middlemen only continue to grow. Not to mention, you think about it from the standpoint of a small business owner. who's now on the hook for providing employer-based insurance. That is a heavy, heavy cost burden for our small business owners, for our farmers who I represent when I was in Congress. The idea of having a system that they can rely on for their employees would create so much room for growth within our economy, within our small businesses. And on top of that, the employees themselves, which oftentimes find themselves handcuffed to their job in their place of employment because they're afraid of losing their health care if they were to go somewhere else. So the economy actually becomes more, there's more liveliness to the economy, as we think about how to take this question of healthcare off the table and not make it about the marketplace, but make it about a public good.
Yeah, I mean, New York is also a big freelancer state, right? So many of us spend our careers freelancing, and that is a way for, the people who pay us to not have to pay for any kind of benefits. And it puts a huge burden on the freelancer to find insurance or not have insurance. And I think, I know back in my freelance days, I would work sick. Don't go to the doctor, even if you have insurance. It's not a system that helps really anyone.
No,
I want to kind of go backwards a little bit before we go forwards. You've lived like 10 lives. You played college basketball. You spent 5 years in hip hop.
Yes.
And then 10 years as a lawyer, which is not a normal transition, I don't think. Was it not interesting enough for you? You had to run for office in 2018. Why did you decide to get in public service when you ran in New York 19?
I think my life's diversity of experiences reflects, I think, a fundamental dimension of how I've lived, which is to always try to walk in my purpose and to be true to my own journey. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that makes people, ask questions or confused. But, when I graduated from law school, I had 3, law firms that were providing offers to me. And I told my parents, with my law degree in hand, my Harvard law degree in hand, yeah, I'm going to go rap. And certainly they were a bit surprised by that. But at the time I was inspired and I felt compelled to use hip hop culture in a way that I felt it wasn't, to elevate it as somebody who comes from the culture, who appreciates what it has to offer. I just felt like there was so much more room for the artistry in a political way that I wanted to be a part of. It was not just to entertain, it was to actually empower. And that's what I felt. And that's what drove me to do that. And then I came back home and became a lawyer in many respects because my wife and I, who I met in law school, reconnected, and I wanted to have a family and I wanted to have children and provide. And so I kind of switched my priorities around and was driven by love. But I knew even when I became a lawyer, that was not going to be the end of my career. I knew that there was a purpose beyond just practicing law. I didn't know quite what, though, until Trump won. And when Trump won, there was in much of the same way I felt called to do music after law school, I felt called to serve. I felt called to speak truth to power. I felt called to help and to engage and to lift up people in a way that I felt like they were being unaccounted for and left behind. And ever since I've been in politics, that's been the mission. It's how do you lift up the people? How do you inspire the people? How do you support? How do you make their lives better? I felt that what happened in 2016 was such a devastating blow for my own sensibilities when it came to what it meant to be a public servant. Up to that point, I'd viewed politics through the lens of it's not transformational enough. The ceiling is too low. And then I realized that when you do that and you check out and you don't engage, the floor can bottom out. And I feel like we've been bottoming out. And so all the progress has been made by those who came before us, who sacrificed so much to make sure that floor kept being elevated. I started to feel like it was coming undone. And I had a responsibility, just like all of us have a responsibility, to figure out how to at least maintain that floor and then build from the floor up and not let the bottoms keep bottoming out. And so that to me was a real revelation when I saw what happened in 2016. And I just thought to myself and my wife, we both just thought, we can't be on the sidelines. We've benefited too much, from that dream, from upward mobility, from stability in a way that, folks coming up behind us just aren't anymore.
Yeah, I think, this is a question I think a lot of people are having about 26 right now. And, Trump right now is sort of desperately underwater. His polling is terrible. It's bad. It's really bad. And from job approval to his, numbers on the economy, to foreign policy, to ICE, the only group that is somewhat less popular than Trump are the Democrats, right? And so you have these insurgencies like your campaign, like Mamdani in the city. Do you feel like that? One, why are the Democrats afraid of insurgencies like this, like yours, like Mamdani's?
Well, one, because the Democratic Party is fundamentally built around self-preservation.
Mm-hmm.
That's how parties, I think, have worked for a long time, especially as they've grown with the amount of wealth and money that moves around political life. The conversation shifts away from protecting people and shifts towards protecting power. And we saw this, how it manifested with Biden in the last election. I was one of the few Democrats, if maybe the only statewide Democrat for sure, and one of the few handful of statewide elected officials, Democrats statewide across the country, that said he should step down back in 2024, not because I was the only one thinking it, but because people were afraid to say something for fear that the party machinery would penalize them and punish them and force them out of line. And so there's a self-preservation, self-protection mode that I think has engulfed the Democratic Party, much in the same way it has on the right. The difference is Trump has sort of blew that whole model up, and he's such his own figure that he's kind of transcended all that and already exploited the realities of that. The Democratic Party is now going through a version of that, hopefully with a far better outcome, but nonetheless a version of the fact that over time it has folded into itself and done so at the expense of the very people it claims to want to help. And so when a Mamdani comes along, or myself comes along, or anybody who's willing to take on power, who's willing to force a conversation about how can we be better, how can we hold ourselves more accountable, and takes the focus off the opposition, then that's too much scrutiny inside the party machinery. And it upends the apple cart in a way that people don't like. And they're more concerned with maintaining the things that they have in place to preserve their own power than they are with dealing with the harsh realities people face because they're doing that very act.
Yeah. Does that party machinery concern you in your own race?
Of course. Well, I wouldn't say it concerns me. It is something that I am contending with. Yeah. It is an explicit engagement with. I know that by running this race, I am setting myself against it intentionally. Mm-hmm. Not because the goal is to defeat it, but because the goal is to offer a choice. That's the fundamental. Obviously, right. I believe I can win. I have a path to victory. But fundamentally, what I don't see time and time again is folks being given a choice on the matter. And the whole idea of a primary, last time I checked, was to create that, was to enable that, was to hold power accountable. I think sometimes what I've noticed people in power is they think that because they possess power, it's self-legitimating.
Right.
It's quite to the contrary. Just because you have power doesn't mean you should have it. If anything, power can be self-corrupting. And so it's incumbent upon us, and that's a big reason why you have primaries, to ensure that that self-corrupting aspect of power, right? Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? That how do you get beyond that without checks and balances, without a system that is open, that enables different points of views to hold power accountable? And Democrats, we point a lot of fingers at Trump and the way he abuses power, but the reality is our politics writ large across the political spectrum has been corrupted in that way.
Yeah, I think one thing that comes out of that polling that is so bad for the Democrats is a sort of dearth of ideas, right? And it's one reason a figure like Mamdani is getting so much juice and energizing so many people is because it's an idea. He has ideas. They are some ideas and they are specific. And I think that is potentially really energizing about your candidacy as well. I want to
ideas, and you got to be able to deliver too.
Well, so that
we have advocated for things, or pockets of the Democratic Party have advocated for things, whether it's a higher minimum wage, whether it is a single payer healthcare system, whether it is universal child care. These are things that we've advocated for: higher taxes on billionaires and big corporations to then take those resources and build out significant opportunities for those who are being left behind. These are ideas that have been put forth that I think are compelling and oftentimes are very reflective of what the people want. The challenge is executing them. The challenge is delivering them. And sometimes the fact of the matter is we have forces within our own power, within our own party, that aren't willing to take that fight, that want to do it in a way that only sort of maintains the status quo. And they'll give lip service to these ideas.
Yeah.
But the one thing Trump has proven, for all of his destructive tendencies, is that if a leader wants to do something, especially the president, they can do it. The question is, do you have the will? And are you willing to put yourself through whatever will come with that? And again, I don't agree with damn near everything the president says and does. But the lesson that I think a lot of Democrats need to learn, particularly leaders need to learn, is how to be more uninhibited. How to be more direct and raw with the vision that we want, so folks can believe that it's a real vision, that it's something that we genuinely want to deliver and not just talk about all the time.
Yeah, I think, Lynette in the chat says DJT won on a concept of a plan, which is absolutely right. But his audience believed that he was going to do something. And
I would just say they believe, though, to the person who commented. And I think the concept, it wasn't just the concept they believed in. What they believed in was the manner in which he communicated it wasn't political speak. It didn't feel like the same poll tested, curated, engineered, manipulated, language that at this point just feels like empty rhetoric. And because he is such a off the wall, that when he communicates, there's a way in which, despite how destructive and ugly his language can be, there's a way in which it feels untethered to some backroom dealer or some monetary force that he doesn't control himself. And I think that for most people on some level is comforting. And because I think a lot of the perception of the political actors is they are being puppeteered, that there is some force behind them that is calling all the shots and not really there to really fight for everyday people. And I think that's something that Democrats in particular have to break through, because we keep saying we are fighting for the everyday person. We keep waving the flag as if we're the party of the working man, but yet it rings hollow when you're not delivering and when you just sound like you're saying the same thing over and over, but not producing.
Yeah. I've heard you say before that, we have to address Trump. We have to, but that can't be all we're about.
No, it can't be. Because if it was, he wouldn't be back. And I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves. It's not like we didn't go through this before. We've lived through Trump before. We saw the calamity. We experienced life and death under his leadership, and destruction under his leadership. And we got out and we thought we had moved on. So the question remains, well, how did it happen? How do we circle back? And I think that, we didn't really land in a place where we were able to convey a future that people could believe in, that, was forward thinking, Biden was in many respects a stabilizing force, which was critical back when he won. But at the time when he decided to run again, the country was looking for something more. They wanted a fresh start. They wanted new voices. They wanted fresh ideas. They wanted to feel like we were turning the page on an era that had, I think, well gone beyond its prime. And that goes for Trump too. That's just the reality. But unfortunately, we never did. We never put our best foot forward. And we didn't, again, because the party protected itself instead of thinking about the people. And as I traveled across New York and talk about my vision and talk about healthcare, talk about housing, a statewide rental assistance program, a statewide first-time homeowner grant program, increasing the minimum wage, universal childcare, pre-K. When I talk about these issues, people like and they're excited about it, but they're also excited about the prospect of the next generation doing the work to deliver these ideas and having the courage, the political and will to fight within the party itself, but also entrenched power that oftentimes gets in the way of these objectives.
Yeah, I think one thing that I love about going to a protest is there's a collective spirit, right? And it is a moment where you realize you are together with people who believe roughly, in the same package of concepts that you do as well. And in that, there's a building, right? There's a gathering of steam. And I think one thing the Democrats and to Trump's credit, something he's, taken away from us is the ability to dream.
Yes. But it's not just him. And again,
Right. Yep.
It's not just, if anything, I'd argue he's taking advantage of the fact that we now live in a society where it is hard to dream, where the idea that anything is possible feels as far out of reach as it's ever felt. And so this goes back full circle to what happens when democracy, it becomes hollow at the core. People stop believing if they can't dream, if they don't see stories of upward mobility. I literally lived a story of upward mobility. I started off in a, tough neighborhood, working class, cutting coupons, putting clothes on layaway, latchkey kid. My parents worked for GE, and they literally worked us up over the course of my childhood into the middle class. We bought our first brand new house when I was a freshman in high school. My dad literally walked me out on the plot of land and said, "This is what hard work in this country gets you, son." Like that kind of experience, it's priceless. And that to me is what makes this country so special. And the notion that it's happening less and less, and that the very essence of that idea is under siege, that allows someone like Trump to step into the void and exploit the fear, the anxieties, the insecurities that naturally are manifesting as a result of that void. And what makes it all the more tragic, in my estimation, is the Democrats have been aiding and abetting this for a very long time. When we leverage, for example, here in New York, billions of dollars every year to draw in select businesses under the umbrella of economic development in the hope that somehow they create jobs that ultimately never materialize, rather than taking that same money and investing it directly into our communities, supporting our New York-based small businesses, supporting our New York-based farms with micro grants or low interest lending, doing things that actually pour capital and create access to capital in our communities here in New York and at home. That just tells you that we're thinking more about the transactional side of politics and the donor class of politics than we are the people-oriented, community-based aspect of politics. And we've done that to win. And over the course of time, we've now won ourselves out of politics because we now lose. We now lost the trust of the people. I think we fundamentally have lost the trust and the confidence of the people.
Do you see a world where we get that back?
If I didn't, I wouldn't be running.
That's a good answer.
I definitely do. And I think as dark as these days are, I think that's when the light can shine the brightest. That's when the light can truly pierce through. It is dark, but the long view of history teaches us that we've seen darker days. We've lived through more troubled times, and so more violent times. And so, I'm eternally optimistic and believe that we have the ability now, with real leadership that is dedicated, that is committed to being vulnerable, that is able to demonstrate the capacity to love. That's how I won in my congressional seat that no Democrat ever won. A 90% white. Trump won it by 7 points 2 years prior in 2016, the 8th most rural congressional seat. What I learned serving in that district is when you love hard and when you show up and you're accounted for and you account for people, that's what matters more sometimes than anything else. Besides, outside of the issues, it's, do you really care about me and my family? Are you really going to fight for the community? And I think that human spirit, that desire to want to be seen and heard, that goes nowhere.
Right.
You can't erase that from humanity, right? That is a quintessential, essential human trait. And so the leader has always the ability to connect when you're willing to tap into that essential mode and make sure people are heard, make sure they are accounted for, not judged, not dismissed.
Nope. He's frozen. We'll wait a second for him to come back.
Oh,
there you are. We got you back.
When did I lose you?
Right in the middle of a really great sentence. That's all I can say. Of course, that's what happened. But I want to just on that note, and if you have a couple more minutes, I just have just a little question to ask. Do you have a minute?
I think I got a minute or two where
okay.
I'm getting to the edge.
Well, so as Lieutenant Governor, I think a lot of us out here are really concerned about the attack on blue states in particular. And one thing that has given me a little bit of hope is the West Coast coalition, the sort of blue states and the East Coast teaming up. Are you in your capacity? Are you concerned about Trump invading New York?
Yes, of course.
You
see what he's doing. You see what he's doing in Portland, and now he's federalizing troops outside the state, despite the fact that the state did not consent. You see what's going on in Illinois. It's a complete abuse of power. It's a complete overreach. The courts are going to be critical, and you see the courts are. The one thing I'll say is, there's wins, there's losses, but what the court system, the judiciary system, is demonstrating some strength in its capacity. You had a Trump appointed judge, basically say, we're not here to uphold martial law. We are a system rooted in constitutional law, not martial law. So you are seeing the guardrails, the checks and the balances, and I think it's about creating a very strong posture at the outset, making it clear from the governor's perspective, lieutenant governor's perspective, we're not cooperating, we're not consenting, that we are, there is no emergency to be dealt with here. There's no crisis to legitimate your conduct. You are literally violating the 10th Amendment, where we have full jurisdiction. So you want to try to federalize the National Guard. Okay, what is the rationale for that? And how does it comport with the legal standard? And time again, he keeps coming up short. And the question we have to ask ourselves, not just as elected officials, but as citizens of this country, is how long are we willing to tolerate this complete disregard for the rule of law, this complete disregard for the Constitution? This man is literally shredding the very legal foundations of our democracy. And we did not elect him. He was not elected to break the law. See, and I think people sometimes confuse, well, this is the will of the people. No one voted for him, and nor can you vote for somebody to break the law.
Right.
So we got to separate out the fact that, yes, he is a duly elected official who won an election, but no one's elected to break laws. When you break laws, that is a problem, and that there should be accountability for that. And so he consistently is demonstrating a complete disregard for his obligation to faithfully execute the laws of the land. And that to me is where we have to really continue to wrestle with it, and not just in terms of leadership, certainly, but also the citizenry. We have to begin to engage in resistance, in nonviolent resistance, in civil disobedience, in ways that demonstrate that we are beyond the breach.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the party in power, which is something we have not stressed enough here, but the party in power is fully capitulated. They are literally non-existent. That is a fundamental check. The Congress is a fundamental check on the executive branch, and literally it is non-existent with Republicans in charge. It is literally an appendage of the executive, which is a complete affront to what the founding fathers intended when they designed 3 co-equal branches of government. So that is the other piece of this that history will not smile on at all when it comes to what the Republicans in power did in the Senate and in the House. They literally completely abrogated all responsibility in this moment, completely. And it is a travesty. It's a disgrace, honestly. It is a complete disgrace.
Do you miss it? Do you miss being in the house?
No. I love.
I can't even imagine. I love
being home. I love being able to be to serve my state. I grew up in New York. My parents were born and raised in New York. My wife and I met, we met in law school, but we both are from New York. Grew an hour apart. Had our family here. Got married here. I love New York. It's given me so much, and to be able to serve in the executive here in New York, it gives me a lot of hope. I know what New York is capable of. New York is the tip of the spear when it comes to this country's progress, with the labor movement, the NAACP founding, LGBTQ plus with Stonewall, suffrage movement. We embody so much here in New York, and I don't feel that sense of force coming out of New York right now. I feel a void, and it's incumbent upon us right now in this moment to fill that void with leadership that is demonstrable, that is decisive, that is principled, that has a vision tied to it, that is not tied to party, power, or profit, but tied to purpose and tied to the people.
Well, that's a great spot to end. I'm so grateful to have you, Lieutenant Governor Delgado. Please tell everyone where they can find more out about you.
Delgado for NY, ny.com. For ny.com. That's
amazing.
What you can learn all about it.
And we will post that in the write-up of this show as well. And man, I really wish you luck. And
Thank you.
I hope you'll come back.
Would love to. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.